Today I'm going to talk about hormones and nervous system regulation and trauma. So, as a naturopathic doctor, the first many years of my practice was dedicated almost exclusively to hormonal balancing, particularly with women, but also men. Now, this is an epidemic, in my opinion, in our culture because of how we live our lifestyles, right? Lots of stress, not good rest, not good nutrition, etc., etc., etc. Now, one of the things that happens is when somebody has a poorly regulated nervous system, this is very hard on the hormonal system. Similarly, and probably as a result of the nervous system or as a cause of the nervous system dysregulation, is when there's been a history of trauma. That's also what we know actually from the literature, is that this is difficult on the hormonal system, particularly on cortisol levels. Now, cortisol is one of the main stress hormones that we produce and need. And you likely heard about it. High cortisol gets a bad reputation. However, low overall cortisol production is also just as bad. Now, cortisol balance is so important for our overall well-being. So when we have too much cortisol output, it's going to mess with your immune system, it's going to mess with your digestive system, it's going to mess with all this stuff, because in those states we're prioritizing, the body is going to prioritize liberating resources so that we can run from a stressor, right? Whether that's an angry boss or a wild tiger animal, it's sort of irrelevant what it is, it's how the body perceives it. So when we get into that stress state, we're going to funnel the resources to things that help us survive rather than help us rest, rejuvenate, thrive, be in connection with other people. Now, both high and low cortisol tend to have this effect to varying degrees. It's a lot more complex than I'm making it sound. The point I want to get at here is that when we've experienced trauma, when our nervous system is dysregulated, this really messes with our hormonal balance. You can imagine if you've experienced a lot of childhood trauma. As a child, if your body was basically bathed in cortisol, either starting even in utero and then throughout your childhood because of the stressful situations that are going on, that's really going to impact the setup of your baseline nervous system state. When our body puts out a lot of cortisol for a long period of time, so rather than experiencing a stress, having some cortisol output, and then the stressor goes away, and then the cortisol secretion drops down again, and our bodies are able to recover. In these situations of persistent trauma or persistent stress in our life, we're going to have a cortisol output that's going to last longer than, say, is, I don't know, for lack of a better word, natural. What the body does, what the brain does actually, is the signaling that goes to our adrenal glands, which make cortisol, starts to turn the volume down on it, because our body inherently knows that having high cortisol for long periods of time would be very, very hard on our health. So it's like, well, the stress is not going to go away, so let's just turn the volume down on the production of cortisol. And what we see in these people is a overall lowered production of cortisol later in life. Now, this is a problem because we do need some cortisol. It's important for our health. It's probably one of the most important hormones for our survival. What we want is we want a little spike of cortisol in the beginning of the day to help us wake up and get alert, and then it slowly decreases throughout the day. This is sort of a natural circadian rhythm of cortisol, which is important for our health. When we see people who don't have that morning spike, they have a flattened cortisol curve, we see negative health outcomes in the long term with this. So it is important to have some cortisol, not too much, not too little. When we have a history of trauma, it very much impacts this. And in many cases, we'll see adults with actually a lower overall cortisol output, especially when there's been a history of childhood trauma, although both can happen. So a lot of the work that I do when I work with people on their somatic journey is also to assess the hormonal the hormonal system. Now, through nervous system regulation strategies, through integrating trauma and working with that energy in the body, that overall is going to have a regulating effect on the hormonal system. Now, I do often use botanicals to help people along that path, because very often when they end up in my office, or if you've been someone who's experienced a lot of childhood trauma, by the time you get into your 40s, your hormonal system has been in a disarray probably for many years, right? And so part of helping to pull out of that is we can work with herbal medicine to help restore balance to the nervous system again. Now, one of the reasons that I got into doing nervous system regulating work and somatic healing is because just treating the hormones alone is not enough. If your nervous system is dysregulated, and I do some work with herbs to help get some of those levels back into a normal state, once we take the herbs away, if your nervous system is still dysregulated because of unhealed trauma, because of stressors in your life, because of whatever, then you're going to tend to end up back with that same pattern of hormonal imbalance. So I've spoken a little bit about cortisol, but this also affects the other sex hormones: testosterone, DHEA, estradiol, progesterone, etc. So this impacts our health in many ways and is a really important piece. So for some people who've experienced a lot of stress and tend to have hormonal imbalances, very pronounced hormonal imbalances, I think that it's really important to be addressing nervous system regulation in order to heal that in the long term. So I hope this video was helpful for you and it helped shed the light on the relationship between hormones and your nervous system. And if you like this video, please like it, share it to anybody that you think could benefit. And I have just launched a new program. It's a 12-week somatic healing program, a one-on-one work with myself for 12 weeks in this beautiful, safe somatic container. And you can check that out at meganjan.com/empower. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.